Here is something experienced great loopers rarely say, until someone asks them directly. Some of the boats they see for sale at transient docks belong to people who bought the wrong boat for the journey. Not bad boats, often beautiful boats, but boats designed for something other than a year on the water at 8 knots. Today we are looking at 5 categories of boats retirees consistently regret buying for the Great Loop, and the lesson behind all of them. Because a great boat and a Great Loop boat are not always the same thing. Number 5. Sea Ray Sundancer Express Cruisers. The Sea Ray Sundancer's reputation is entirely deserved for the context it was designed for. Coastal cruising, weekend passages, day trips where aggressive styling, confident performance, and well-appointed interiors make the experience genuinely pleasurable. They are available in large numbers on the used market and represent real value for their intended purpose. The problem on the Great Loop is that their intended purpose and the journey's requirements diverge in ways that become increasingly apparent with miles. Fuel consumption is the first divergence. The engines fitted to most Sundancers in the relevant size range were calibrated for planing speeds. Holding them at 8 knots means operating them in the inefficient middle of their power curves, burning more fuel per mile than a displacement trawler covering the same distance. Loop neighbors in mainship 34s and Nordic tugs are spending meaningfully less at every fuel dock. That difference, accumulated across the journey, becomes a number worth acknowledging. Storage is the second divergence, and the one that tends to produce the more acute frustration. The Sundancer's interior was designed for nights, not months. The locker arrangement, the galley footprint, the berth geometry, all of it reflects a design philosophy built around short trips. 2 people attempting to live aboard for a year find themselves making decisions the boat was never meant to require. Tools compete with clothing. Spare parts compete with provisions. Every storage solution feels like a compromise because it is. Most owners who sell them don't say the boat failed. They say it was simply the wrong tool for the job. And most eventually end up in trawlers. If this video is already making you think differently about your boat search, take a second, hit the like button, subscribe to Boat Hunter, and turn on the notification bell. We cover real boats and real decisions for serious cruisers every week. Now let us get into number 4. Number 4. Oversized motor yachts. The appeal of a 50-foot motor yacht for the Loop is understandable. If you are living aboard for a year or more space, a larger galley, and a salon that feels residential all have genuine merit. Boats like the Carver Voyager 530 are not bought carelessly. What changes on the Loop is not how the boat performs. It is what owning it comes to feel like. Slip fees are priced by the foot, and over a year or more, those differences add up faster than many buyers expect. Maintenance complexity is the more relentless consequence. A 50-foot motor yacht with dual generators, extensive HVAC, complex electrical systems, stabilizers, and twin large displacement engines requires regular professional attention. The Loop passes through many places where that attention is available, and many where it is not. One couple who completed the Loop on a Carver 5030 said the journey was worth every mile, and that they spent far too much of it feeling like caretakers rather than travelers. Managing systems, monitoring gauges, scheduling service. The smaller trawlers around them simply did not share that burden. They sold the Carver and bought a DEFA 44 within a year. They called it buying back their peace of mind. Complexity sustained over 18 months produces a fatigue that shows up in marina conversations with notable consistency. Number 3. Sportfish convertibles. Before discussing why sportfish convertibles struggle on the Loop, it is worth acknowledging what they are at their best. A Viking 48 convertible, or a Hatteras 46 convertible, running offshore in the Gulf Stream, is in exactly the environment it was built for. The power, the speed, the seakeeping, the cockpit designed for fighting large pelagic fish. These boats represent decades of refinement, aimed at one mission: In that mission, they are genuinely world-class. The loop places them somewhere else entirely. The deeper issue is not simply fuel. It is that a sportfish convertible running at 8 knots on the Tennessee River is a machine operating at a fraction of its intended capability. The engines are calibrated for offshore runs at 20 to 25 knots. The hull was designed for the Atlantic. The cockpit was designed for anglers. None of those priorities have any application on the inland waterway system, and their presence is not neutral. It represents weight, complexity, and consumption that the loop has no use for. Fixed bridges create another layer of planning that offshore boats were never designed to deal with. The radar towers, outriggers, and flybridge structures that make sportfish convertibles capable offshore create air draft profiles that restrict route flexibility on river and canal systems. The retired couple who attempted the loop on a Hatteras 36 convertible described it as driving a sports car on a country road for a year. The car was excellent. The road was wrong. They stored the Hatteras after reaching the Great Lakes and completed the return by different means. These boats belong on the ocean. The loop is not the ocean. That single sentence contains most of what needs to be understood. Number 2. Cheap older boats with deferred maintenance. This category requires careful framing because the lesson is easy to misread. The mistake is not buying an older boat. Some of the finest loop vessels in regular service today are older trawlers, marine traders, DeFever 44s, and Grand Banks classics built in the 1970s and 1980s, maintained with the consistency those boats reward. Age is not the problem. Deferred maintenance, masquerading as value, is the problem. The used market contains a reliable supply of vessels priced attractively because the previous owner reached the point where proper maintenance exceeded their willingness or ability to pay. They stopped, they listed the boat, and they wrote descriptions using phrases like good bones and strong project potential and lots of life left in her. Phrases experienced marine surveyors have learned to translate with some precision. What follows the purchase of one of these boats has a texture that veterans describe with a combination of sympathy and dark humor. The electrical system reveals itself first. An older boat with deferred electrical maintenance accumulates decades of additions, improvisations, and temporary solutions no one ever returned to make permanent. Wiring for equipment removed years ago remains in place, contributing to a harness resembling an archaeological record of every owner's good intentions. Grounds never properly established create behavior that seems almost intentional. Instruments working intermittently, lights flickering without cause, electronics resetting in maddening patterns. Diagnosing these systems takes weeks that were supposed to be spent cruising. Plumbing follows the same pattern. Hoses installed the previous decade, living in a wet bilge ever since. Fittings technically functional, but on borrowed time. Through hulls last serviced by an owner whose name appears nowhere in the documentation. The boat rarely fails catastrophically. It weeps. It admits water in volumes too small to be alarming and too persistent to be ignored. Every joint is a small claim on the owner's attention, and their collective weight over months becomes genuinely significant. The engine room tells its own story. The oil leak the previous owner learned to live with and never mentioned. The cooling system losing pressure on passages longer than 2 hours. The raw water impeller last changed at an interval, suggesting it was never changed at all. The stories loopers share about engine room discoveries in bargain boats share a quality of escalation. A small concern during the survey became a larger concern at the first fuel dock, and a genuine problem by week 3. One retiree purchased a Marine Trader 42 at what he understood to be a genuine bargain. The hull and structure were sound. The survey confirmed this. What the survey captured less completely was the scope of deferred maintenance across the systems. He spent 4 of his first 8 months in boatyards. His original Gulf departure date was revised 3 times. Repair costs exceeded the purchase price of the vessel. He finished the loop. He is glad he did. He also became one of the most knowledgeable advocates for professional surveys in his regional looper community. His advice to anyone who asks is consistent. Buy condition, not price. A well-maintained 1983 marine trader at a fair price will serve you better than a 2003 boat at a bargain price that reflects what the previous owner chose not to fix. What deferred maintenance steals is not primarily money, though the money is real. It steals time. Weeks in boatyards are weeks not spent on the Tennessee River, not spent in small harbor towns, not spent watching America change season by season from the water. That loss is the one retirees in this situation describe most consistently and most painfully. Before we get to number 1, notice what the previous 4 categories share. With Sundancers, the mismatch becomes clear after months of living aboard. With oversized yachts, complexity accumulates gradually. With sportfish convertibles, the wrong tool feeling builds over miles. With deferred maintenance boats, problems reveal themselves over time. In each case, the owner discovers the issue after the purchase. The boat looked right from the outside. The final category is different. There is nothing hidden about the problem. It is visible in the hull shape and the design specifications. Experienced loopers can identify it from the dock before the boat moves, and yet it remains the category that catches the most first-time buyers by surprise. It is about design philosophy, and understanding it changes how you look at every boat. Number 1. High-speed planing boats. A planing hull rises onto the surface of the water at speed. Below that threshold, it pushes through inefficiently, burning fuel without delivering the performance the design was built around. Above it, the hull lifts. Resistance drops, and the boat does what it was meant to do. Performance motor yachts, formula yachts, and most express cruisers are built on this principle. Fast, capable, and genuinely efficient, within the speed range they were designed for. A displacement hull moves through the water at all times, optimized for 6 to 10 knots, where its resistance characteristics are most favorable. The Grand Banks 36, the DeFever 44. At 8 knots, these boats achieve an efficiency planing hulls at the same speed simply cannot match. Semi-displacement designs like the Mainship 34 and Nordic Tug 32 sit between these categories, offering flexibility while maintaining the economy that makes long-range cruising sustainable. The loop happens at displacement speeds, locks, no-wake zones, canal restrictions, the whole rhythm of the journey. It all unfolds at a pace that suits displacement hulls and penalizes planing hull operating costs at every stop. But the operating costs, significant as they are not the deepest part of this story. Something changes on the loop. It happens gradually, somewhere in the 2nd or 3rd month, often on the Tennessee River or the Gulf Coast, and it is difficult to anticipate from the planning stage. The urgency that drove the preference for speed quietly dissolves. Nobody is racing. The next stop will still be there tomorrow. The passage itself, the light on the river, the changing shoreline, the conversations with other loopers on the radio, becomes more interesting than arrival. Speed, which once felt like a feature, stops mattering. And at that point, the owner of a planing hull boat confronts a calculation with no good answer. They are paying every day for 30-knot capability they have not used in months. The performance envelope that justified the boat's design, the horsepower, the fuel consumption, the hull characteristics, is premised on speeds the loop never asks for. Every mile traveled is a mile in the worst portion of the operating range. The boat is being held back from what it was built to do, and it is charging for the restraint. He said it felt like having a thoroughbred horse and spending a year walking it. The horse was magnificent. Walking was simply not what the horse was for. He stopped in Kentucky, stored the formula, flew home, bought a Mainship 390, and finished the loop the following year. He said the main ship taught him something the formula never could. There is a specific pleasure available only to boats doing exactly what they were designed to do, in exactly the conditions they were designed for. 8 knots on the Tennessee River in a semi-displacement trawler feels right in a way that 8 knots in a 30-knot boat never quite does. That is the lesson experienced loopers return to most consistently. Not that fast boats are inferior, but that the loop rewards boats built for distance. And the difference is felt every day, in the quality of the passage and in the quiet satisfaction of a boat operating within its intended purpose. The boat is present for all of it. Choose one designed for the distance, and it quietly disappears into the background, letting the journey take center stage, because in the end, the boat is not the destination. It is simply the tool that allows you to experience one of the greatest retirement adventures in America. If you are planning the Great Loop, tell us what boat you are considering in the comments below. Experienced loopers check in here regularly, and some of the best advice on the internet often ends up in these discussions. Subscribe to Boat Hunter and turn on the notification bell. Every week, we cover real boats, real costs, and the honest realities of retirement cruising. We will see you in the next one.